Hi everyone, Andy Klein here to show you the third version of the fast travel vise that Charlie and I have been working on. So, spoiler alert, this is not going to be the final version. There's still some things that just aren't ready for mass consumption on this vise. But we have made some progress, moved the ball forward. So let's start with what's good about this version. So in the previous version, the front jaw was held rigidly perpendicular to the shaft with this bearing mounted behind the wheel. We've eliminated that, and now this is held rigid, I think even more rigid, by two bushings, one in the front and one in the back of the front jaw, just held in place with a little clip. So that is working very well, and I think it simplifies the look of the vise. This thing only adds cost. I'll talk about cost in a second. So I'm happy to get rid of it. Secondly, the threaded rod is milled down to 5/8 inch for the entire length between the end of the hand wheel and the back of the back jaw. So the threads at this point start right here, and I'll show you in a second. The nut is mounted behind the back jaw. So what that allows, if you open the vise just a little bit and drop the board in like this, you don't hit the threads. Now there are some more complicated ways of doing this on other vices, but I thought this was really a clean, simple way to make that happen. So I like that feature, and that one's probably going to stick around. Okay, and third new feature that I like to take a look at. Got to flip it upside down. The distance between the shaft that the cam pulls on and the threaded rod can vary between 22 inches and 14 inches. I've got it set up at 18 inches right now for my little bench mock-up. But I think that's a real nice feature. It gives a good lot of versatility. So that's good. That one's sticking around. Now let's take a look at some of the not so positive aspects of the current design. So the travel of the vise works really great. It's very smooth for about 5 inches. Does just what it's supposed to do. However, after 5 inches, it starts to get a little tighter. It's very easy to see when I don't have the vise clamped down. If I turn the hand wheel like this, I have less of that problem. It starts working well again. But it seems like the torque that I'm putting on the wheel is causing this rod to bounce around a little bit and jam in the nut. And if I sell it like this, you're not going to be happy. So I need to do something about that. I think what I'm going to do is include a bushing. That's bushing. Right, obviously I can't slip it on, but embedded in this back jaw, just to keep everything aligned and not let it get jammed up in the nut. I think this will be enough to work. It'll be a relatively simple thing to install here. I'll have to use a washer with some holes drilled in it to hold it in place. So it doesn't add much to the difficulty of putting the vise together and installing everything. It adds very little to cost, and hopefully it'll solve the problem. So version 4, bushing for the threaded rod, that needs to happen. Okay, what else isn't working out right? So the way this vise is supposed to work, when I put a workpiece in like this, I turn the hand wheel until it grips it. You get some racking happening, but it's holding the workpiece in place, so you can take your hand off the wheel. You flip the cam, and it's supposed to take the rack out. As you can see, not all the rack is coming out of the jaw. It's not lining up parallel. It's not making good contact all the way across, even though I have this tightened down as much as I can. still got to play on one side, and that's no good because clamping power will be reduced. I mean, it's still pretty good, but I can move it around, and that's a problem. Even without leather, this should be gripping well. So why is this happening? So taking a closer look at the actual hardware here, you might think the reason I'm running into this problem, why I can't get the rack out of the front jaw, this back plate is no longer rigid enough. So it gives and bends too easily, and it doesn't create enough force to pull this side of the jaw forward and take that rack out. So taking a look at that same operation upside down, put the rack in with the hand wheel, should take it out with the cam, but look how much I'm flexing here, and I'm not creating enough force to pull this forward. Okay, so why is that happening? Well, there's two reasons. There's really two ways that this back plate can be not rigid enough. The first is a pivot point here at the nut. If I'm tugging here, I can rotate around this pivot point at the nut. Now these two bars are supposed to be preventing that from happening by staying rigid and not letting the pivoting happen from here, but they're not rigid enough. Okay, taking a look from a better vantage point, you can see those rods flexing. It's not a lot, but it's enough to allow pivoting at this point. So what am I going to do about it? Well, I'm going to replace these two 1/2-inch bars with 5/8 inch case hardened rods. And this case hardened rod is substantially more rigid than these guys. So this should be more than enough to keep the pivoting from here happening and should make this a lot stiffer. Okay, so let's assume that in version 4 I just make that replacement. Is that going to be good enough? I don't think so. I'll show you why. So let's pretend that I fixed that problem and these two bars are very rigid. I'll simulate that by putting this block here and clamping it down and not letting the threaded rod move at all. That should be the same as having those case hardened rods in place. Now I tighten the cam down and I still have flexing because I have a second pivot point right here. So what I've done with this version is turn down the 1-inch threaded rod to 5/8 of an inch so it can fit in this 1-inch tube steel. This keeps everything nice and thin. It lets me get the screw mounted close to the workbench, which helps with racking in the jaws. So all that's good. However, when I tighten the cam, I get deflection in the shaft at this point because I've just made it a little too weak. That rod is just not strong enough when it's turned down to 5/8 of an inch. So what am I going to do about this problem? Well, the first instinct, of course, is to say you got to leave the threaded rod just 1 inch all the way through. This tube steel's got to grow. The channel right here has to grow and turn. That would probably work. Problem is, a couple problems with that. First of all, the threaded rod is one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive component in this whole vise. And adding just 3 inches, that adds some cost. And I'm trying to do everything I can to hit a reasonable price point. And I think this case hardened 5/8 inch rod could be my solution again for this. If I cut the threaded rod off here, drill into it, find a way to join these together, which I have some ideas on that, then this rod is going to be a whole lot more rigid than the turned down 5/8 inch section that I have right here, and hopefully rigid enough that this plate can create enough force that when I tighten the cam and apply pressure right here, I don't have all that flexing. With more rigid rods here and here, I think that should be enough to solve the problem. Okay, now there's one more thing I want to change for the next version. You may have noticed that these two tracking bars in this back plate just contact each other steel on steel when they travel. I think that's probably okay, but a couple other observations. This is 1-inch tube steel. This is 1.5-inch channel. I did that because 1-inch tube steel and 1.5-inch channel don't have any interference with each other. There's a little bit of clearance, and I thought that would probably be best. But I noticed if I buy 1.25-inch channel, there is a little bit of interference, and that's probably actually a good thing. When I bolt these two together, it's self-aligning. You don't have to worry about getting that alignment right when you're putting it together, so that's better. The other thing I noticed, there's a little bit of a gap in here, and that gap is just enough, even when tightened, even when these two are bolted together and squeezed a little tighter, to fit a bushing in between. And if I tweak the dimensions of this a little bit and get clever with the placement of the holes, I can sandwich two bushings for the two tracking rods for each of the different setups from 22 inches to 14 inches on this plate. So now I have bushings contacting the rods which is going to give a much smoother action for the vise. For just the cost of some ingenuity and the bushings themselves, which are pretty much price irrelevant. So I've alluded to price a couple times, just wanted to touch on that. How much do I think this is going to cost? Well, probably the most comparable products that you could compare this to on the market right now are the Lie-Nielsen and Lee Valley chain-coupled twin screw vices. The Lee Valley sells for $250, the Lie-Nielsen's $285. Now those are established, respected brands. I'm a YouTuber, so I really think I need to bring this one in at low 200s. That way I can say it eliminates the complexity of the screw. It provides similar long distance between two shafts, clamping, non-racking functionality, plus it has fast travel. So really it's better and costs less than what's out there. And that's why if I get suggestions for really nice linear action bearing kind of assemblies and all those things that I understand exist, it's just not feasible. I'm never going to hit that price point. I need to be clever, figure out how to deliver really good functionality for low cost. That's what I'm trying to do here. So I'm going to get to building version 4. Hopefully that is perfect. But if not, I'm going to keep building these things until I get it right. Kind of got the bit in my teeth on this one. So anyway, hope you enjoyed. Oh, one more thing. Thanks to Charlie Kasorek for baking both this channel and this tube steel for the current version. You can check out how he did that in this video right here. Thanks, everyone.